everybody. Welcome to Search the Scriptures. We're on study number 13 in the book of Judges, which covers Judges 14 and 15. One of my favorite stories, part 2 today, the story of Samson. And I've got my running shirt on. The day you're supposed to be watching this video is November 6th of 2010, if you're following us along. And I am running a marathon on that day. I'm recording this the day before. So if you're watching this between 8 o'clock and 12 o'clock on Saturday, November the 6th of 2010, pray for me before you go any farther in this study, because I'm going to need it if I'm going to finish this race. We're going to answer two different questions today over study 13, over these two chapters, Judges 14 and 15. The first is this: note the contradictory elements in Samson's character as we read through this. He was a judge in Israel, yet his life story centers around his dubious relationship with Philistine women. His unshorn locks denoted a Nazirite consecrated to God, yet his chief aim was to please himself. How many more such contrasts can you discover, and how important is it that we should be consistent in our Christian profession? And secondly, what does the incident of 15, 18, and 19 teach regarding God's ability to supply every need of his servants? Let's look at Judges 14 and 15 together. Judges 14, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I've seen a Philistine woman in Timnah, now get her for me as my wife. His father and mother replied, Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me. She's the right one for me. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother, and as they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring toward him, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. Now that phrase, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, is important. Remember, in the last chapter, the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Verse 7, Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. And sometime later, when he went back to marry her, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, and in it was a swarm of bees and some honey. And he scooped out the honey with his hands, and he ate as he went along. And when he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate it, but he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Now his father went down to see the woman, and there Samson held a feast, as was customary for young men. And when the people saw him, they chose 30 men to be his companions. Let me tell you a riddle, Samson said to them. If you can give me the answer within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. And if you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Tell us your riddle, they said. Let's hear it. He replied, Out of the eater something to eat, and out of the strong something sweet. And for 3 days they could not give the answer. And on the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, Coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to steal our property? Then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, You hate me, you don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't even explained it to my father or mother, he replied, so why should I explain it to you? She cried the whole 7 days of the feast, so on the 7th day he finally told her, because she continued to press him, and she in turn explained the riddle to her people. And before sunset on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And Samson said to them, If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. Not a good way to start out a marriage, calling your wife a heifer, by the way. Verse 19, Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of everything, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he returned to his father's home, and Samson's wife was given to one of his companions who attended him at the feast. Now it's important to note that his father-in-law gave the wife away, not Samson. Judges 15. Later on, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. And he said, I'm going to my wife's room, but her father would not let him go in. I was so sure you hated her, he said, that I gave her to your companion. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines, and I will really harm them. So he went out, and he caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails and lit the torches and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. And he burned up the shocks and the standing grain together with the vineyards and the olive groves. And when the Philistines asked, who did this? They were told, Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his companions. So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. And Samson said to them, since you've acted like this, I swear that I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. And he attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Edom. It's important to note that the words, the Spirit of the Lord was upon him, aren't mentioned in this incident. Verse 9, the Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi, and the people of Judah asked, why have you come to fight us? We have come to take Samson prisoner, they answered, to do to him as he did to us. And then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Edom and said to Samson, don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us? He answered, I merely did to them what they did to me. And they said to him, we've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines. Samson said, swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves. Agreed, they answered. We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him, shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. And the ropes of his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. And finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, with the donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them, and with the donkey's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men. And when he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramath Lehi. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, you have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? And then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and the water came out of it. And when Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En Hakor, and it is still there in Lehi. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Question 1. Note the contradictory elements in Samson's character. He was a judge in Israel, yet his life story centers around his dubious relationship with Philistine women, his unshorn locks denoted a Nazirite consecrated to God, yet his chief aim was to please himself. How many more such contrasts can you discover, and how important is it that we should be consistent in our Christian profession? Well, he found a bride in vineyard country. He made riddles about touching dead lions and donkey jawbones, and he had a wedding feast, as was the custom, with wine. When we fail to be consistent in our Christian profession, we drag those that we love the most into the midst of our sins. We do not sin in isolation. Look at everything that happened to Samson. His wife, his father-in-law, his mom and dad, everybody was drug into the sin of Samson. The sin of being in the vineyard, the sin of touching the dead carcass, the sin of touching the dead donkey jawbone involved everybody around him. Second question, what does the incident of 15, 18, and 19 teach regarding God's ability to supply every need of his servants? And this is when God provided water for Samson. In spite of the fact that we fail, as was the case of Samson, God continues to show his mercy by having his Spirit come upon us and giving us divine provision when we are hurting. I'm hoping for that tomorrow in the marathon, for God's mercy, for his Spirit to be upon me, and for divine provision, and for him to quench my thirst and touch my aching muscles. We got to be very careful, though, not to take those moments of God's provision as signs that everything is okay in our lives. These times are only demonstrations of God's mercy, when he could just as easily display his wrath. And that's a hard lesson that Samson was to find out later on in his life when he experienced the wrath of God. I'm hoping tomorrow for God's mercy and not God's wrath. And I hope that you'll be praying for me as I'm running. God bless. Have a fantastic rest of your day.